Chapter 6 of The Voice of the Lion Was Heard in the Land. A Good Omens fanfiction. Written by A.N.D. Read aloud by SkyAsimaru. If you enjoy this podfic, you can check out the original story on Archive of Our Own. If you would like to hear more of my recordings or see some of my own work, you can find me through the pen and screen name of SkyAsimaru. The Voice of the Lion Was Heard in the Land. Chapter 6 A Light in the Darkness. Summary. Az lay so still that for a horrible moment Tony thought they were too late. Tony hadn't told anyone what flight he was taking back to London. There was nobody to tell, not with Az beyond his reach and Leo over and done. But there they were, just past customs, his Leo castmates, his Leo friends, waiting for him. Tracy, Shadwell, Newton, and the woman leading them must be Anathema. Newton had shown him a picture once. Tony only knew her as a voice over the phone. That familiar voice spoke now. "Good! You're finally here! Have you spoken to Az recently?" Tony's heart twisted, but he kept his tone as calm as possible.
"No. We broke up ages ago. I'm not the creepy kind who keeps bothering exes."
"Liar!" Anathema turned out to have a startling way of seeing right through your eyes to your soul. "You two have never stopped loving each other."
"Fine!"
Tony was not going to cry in front of them. He was not.
"We certainly stopped talking to each other."
"He hasn't talked to anyone since his appearance on my mother's show. He hasn't even been seen." "We've tried going to his door," Tracy added. "No answer. We're all ever so worried." Newton, as usual, cut straight through to the practicalities.
"Today we stopped knocking and hoping. We're going in. Do you still have your key to the flat?"
"No." Tony looked away, swallowing hard.
"Too much temptation to use it if I came back and was still in disgrace, which for all I know, I still am."
"Take it from your agent? You're not," Anathema told him. "Well, we'll have to find another way in."
"Not a problem,"
Shadwell muttered.
"I can get yon door open."
They knocked for what seemed like ages. Az didn't come to the door. "Time for you," Anathema said, standing back and waving Shadwell to the door. Tony thought he would kick the door down. It wouldn't bother him if he did. Shadwell was stocky and strong, and Tony was willing to pay for the damages if it got them to Az. However, Shadwell went down on his knees and pulled a set of lockpicks out of his pocket.
"Uncle!"
Newton gasped in horror.
"Didn't want to tell ye, but remember those 2 years your mother told you I was in a touring company?"
The lock snicked open.
"I was in jail for breaking and entering."
"Just like the breaking and entering we're doing this very minute?" Newton asked warily. Anathema threw the door wide. "We're not going to be arrested," she said, as firmly and factually as if she was telling them the sun rose in the east. Az had finally lost his mind. Tony had come to him, and that wasn't possible. He didn't have Tony, no more than he had Leo, no more than he had friends. So many times in the last... whenever... He thought he'd heard Tony's voice from another room. But every time he went there, it was empty. Every time he thought he heard Tony's ringtone, the phone was off. This hallucination was incredibly realistic. Az didn't just hear Tony's voice whispering, "Hi, Angel, Angel, hi, look at me." He felt the bed dipping under his weight, smelled his scent and cologne, wonderingly, afraid to rupture this beautiful dream. Az dared reach out and lightly stroke the side of imaginary Tony's face. It felt soft and warm. Az could even feel the beginnings of stubble. But in the next second, Tony proved he was a hallucination, because he stopped whispering endearments and started saying things that made no sense at all.
"He's in here,"
Dream Tony said.
"He's awake, sort of. I don't think he's been eating."
Definitely a dream. Now Az saw Tony, but heard Tracy saying,
"There's not a speck of food in this flat,"
followed by an impression of, was that young Newton? Saying,
"Should we call 999?
Dream Tony had gotten much better at voices than the real one. The real one was somewhere in America. No matter what Az thought he saw and heard and felt, he didn't have Tony. He didn't have Tracy or Shadwell or Newton as friends. He'd finally lost the plot, and Az welcomed it. He shut his eyes and waited for the weight on the bed to evaporate. Dream Tony laid his hand gently against Az's cheek. Az put his hand over top. Maybe if he held on, this dream wouldn't end as quickly as the others. Az couldn't bear waking up alone anymore.
"Oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God!"
Az looked terrible, curled up there in the bed, and he didn't smell very good either. Judging from the state of his beard and the limpness of his hair, he hadn't groomed himself for well over a week. He lay so still that for a horrible moment Tony thought they were too late, that Az had starved. But he climbed up on their stupidly large bed anyway, whispering,
"Hey, Angel, Angel, hi, look at me."
Az opened his eyes. His gaze was unfocused, but thank God he was moving. He brushed the tips of his fingers over Tony's cheek then, apparently exhausted, closed his eyes again. Tony cupped his cheek, and Az's hand slowly moved to cover his. Az was weak and shaking.
"There's not a speck of food in this flat,"
Tracy announced through the bedroom door. Newton crowded behind her, looking worried.
"Should we call 999?
The press will come,"
Shadwell said flatly.
"It'll be all over the news. He'd hate that."
Anathema pushed through the little crowd.
"He'll be okay if we take care of him."
She contemplated the scene on the bed, wrinkling her nose at the body odor.
"Do you think you can coax him into the shower?"
she asked Tony.
"While he's up, I'll do something about that bedding,"
Shadwell offered. The rest of them stared at him.
"What? I worked in the laundry those 2 years, didn't I?"
Tracy grabbed Newton's arm.
"We'll go get food."
Tony looked at Anathema, concerned.
"This really does need to go exactly the way it's planned."
She gave him a small smile. "It will." Dream Tony was starting to undress him. Ordinarily, these were the best dreams of all. But this one was so particularly realistic that Az resisted. Somewhere in the part of his brain that hadn't shut down in grief, depression, and hunger, he knew that he was disheveled and unwashed. He tried to jerk away.
Don't wanna sex right now,
he managed to mutter. That familiar laugh panted against his forehead, followed by a kiss.
Of course not, Angel. I've been on a plane for 8 hours. I'm far too gross and disgusting. Come shower with me. Scrub my back.
The dream didn't just jump ahead to them in the water, a tiny part of Az's brain noticed. Nor did he suddenly wake up, cold and alone. That was good. He lay and watched through barely open eyes as Dream Tony stripped him down, then undressed himself. Az tried to help Dream Tony undress him, but he was so tired. Every movement was so much effort. He would have curled up again, but Dream Tony was insistent. Then, to remind Az that this was all just a fantasy, the shower turned on by its own while Dream Tony was still in the room with him. Newton turned on the shower and left with Tracy. Tony worried that Az might be too weak to stand, but Az proved willing to do anything as long as he could silently gaze at Tony, occasionally touching him lightly, as if afraid to burst a bubble. As soon as Az was standing upright, Shadwell snuck in and stripped the bed. What Anathema was doing, Tony didn't know, but he could hear her moving around in the front room. Tony carefully shaved him, then wrangled him into the shower and under the water. Oh, God, there was dust on the shampoo bottle. Az closed his eyes against the spray and let Dream Tony take care of him. It was all a lie, but a beautiful one to be savored as long as possible before he inevitably woke up cold, filthy, and alone. He'd needed this so badly. He needed someone to take a burden off him. He let Dream Tony do as he pleased with Az's body, pushing and posing him, eventually turning him to face the water and stepping behind him. Instead of washing his back or anything more exciting, though, Dream Tony's arms suddenly wrapped around Az, hugging so tightly that Az's ribs hurt a bit. Still, he did nothing. If he said or did anything, the dream would end, and Az would be alone again. There was a sharp, wrenching sound behind Az. Was that a sob? Was Dream Tony crying? Az wanted to comfort him, to reassure him, but feared waking himself up. So Az stood, confused, as warm water rolled down his front and warm tears rolled down his shoulder, a bony chest shuddering against his back. At first, Tony focused desperately on the job to be done. Clean up Az, clean up self, distract both of them long enough for Tracy to come back with dinner, and then feed Az while Shadwell finished cleaning and replacing the sheets. But the feeling of Az in his hands again, warm and alive, so badly missed and so badly off, was breaking Tony. How had he walked away from this beautiful man? How could he ever look himself in the mirror again, knowing that it was his fault as ended up like this? It was too much. Tony gathered up the placid, dreamy As into a bear hug and broke down. When he could control himself again, he promised, "I won't leave you again," with a kiss to the back of Az's wet neck. Az sighed happily.
"Oh, this is a good dream. Don't let me wake up soon."
Concerned, Tony turned him to face him.
Az, Angel, you're not dreaming.
Az smiled, the dimmest echo of that familiar joyful beaming, stroking Tony's cheek while he broke Tony's heart.
"Hush, dream. Tony hates me. He didn't want me to.
Az frowned.
I can't remember. Oh, yes. I gave Tony away. And he told me not to give Leo away. But I gave Leo away too. And now everyone in the world hates me."
He said it with the same cheerful frankness that Leo the lion had used to reassure hundreds of worried cartoon friends. Az patted the frozen, horrified Tony on the cheek.
"It's all right. When I wake up, I'm going to take a shower for real. Later, when I'm feeling better."
Oh, God! Oh, God! Oh, God!
Apparently, there were limits to Az's fantasies. The shared shower did not turn into shower sex. Apparently pretending a dream Tony could possibly still want him like that was a step too far. Still, finally feeling clean made him feel surprisingly better. It even gave him a brief burst of energy. What a pity the nature of the dream was revealed again when clean dressing gowns for both of them had somehow magically appeared just outside the bathroom. Az put his, or someone's, on. It looked like his, but in the shifting wonderland of dreams, it had morphed into something far too large for him. The scent of something lovely was wafting in from another room. As Az tried to place it, his stomach gave a gigantic rumble.
"This is the best dream,"
he cheerfully announced to the now quiet and haunted Dream Tony.
"What delicacies are going to appear? Lark's tongue, fried dormice, lobster and filet mignon."
Dream Tony just stared back at him somberly. That's how Az knew it wasn't really his love. The real Tony smiled. Real Tony liked to play pranks. Real Tony had a pretty strong sex drive. Tony wasn't a silent, sad wraith, wiping tears off his face. Still, best not to complain. This was the best Az had felt since before. Before he'd ruined everything. Before Tony went away. Before it all went wrong. Az wandered through the flat to the dining room. There were other dreams flitting around, too. Fantasies that looked like his friends. Except he didn't have friends. Everyone he was imagining hated him in the real world. So Az nodded, but didn't talk to them. He couldn't bear it if this comforting dream turned into the nightmare of them all telling him what they really thought. Tracy had brought back a plain roasted chicken and was taking white rice out of the microwave and putting butter on it when Tony followed Az into the kitchen. On the counter, he could see white bread, potatoes, and bananas. Good foods to stay in the stomach of someone who hadn't been eating.
There are hard-boiled eggs, chicken broth, and milk in the refrigerator. Tea and coffee in the larder,
she whispered as she brushed past Tony, leaving behind 2 plates heaped with rice and chicken. Az had ignored her, and she, noticing his dull, vacant look, ignored him in return.
I'll help Shadwell finish changing the sheets while you two eat.
She turned back to pat the desolate Tony consolingly on the arm.
I've seen worse, dear. Let him neck a couple of proper meals and some real rest, and he should be fine. Eat a little bit, Angel. Just a bite. For me.
Tony urged, as Az stared blankly at his plate, as if he didn't know what food was anymore. For a horrible moment he thought Az might refuse, but then his stomach rumbled loudly. Tony, who was too jet-lagged to do more than stir chicken into rice into circles, kept up a desperate flow of trivia. What he'd seen in the States, nights where things went wrong in the play. At first, Az's responses continued remote and dreamy, but after a few forkfuls, his starving body took over and started shoveling food as fast as possible. The more he ate, the more his responses tracked with what Tony was saying, as if he was beginning to listen and understand, as if he was coming back to reality. Az was almost through with the heaped plate Tracy had left for him when he looked up, stricken, and dropped his fork.
I'm not dreaming,
he said flatly, his eyes sharp, his voice intelligent and alert. Az had woken up. Tony's heart stopped, then hammered double time. He wanted to shout, to dance around the flat, but he held himself to a careful,
"No, you're not, Az. Welcome back, Angel."
Az cringed away, wringing his hands.
What must you think of me? What must you all think of me? That was really Tracy in the kitchen, wasn't it? I was so rude to her.
We all think we've been very worried,
Tony said, trying to put Az's fork back into his hand. Az took it, but he only used it to push the last of his food around, staring at the plate instead of meeting Tony's eyes.
I didn't do what you wanted. I didn't save Leo.
Fuck Leo!
Az's head snapped up, and Tony's heart leaped in joy to see a faint echo of his old wicked sparkle.
I believe there is rather a lot of fanfiction with that theme, dear boy.
Tracy probably reads it.
The wicked sparkle was definitely coming back.
Tracy probably writes it.
One shower and one meal didn't fix everything, of course. Az wasn't a young man anymore. His body was going to take several days to recover physically. Emotionally was going to take longer. Tony and Az had been chatting about nothing. shouting to each other from different rooms as Tony unpacked his bags and Az poked around the kitchen. Suddenly, Az went silent. Tony came out to find him contemplating his mobile phone, which was sitting on top of a pile of papers on a side table.
Have you turned it back on?
Tony asked, wandering over. Az looked up with haunted eyes.
Oh, there's going to be too much.
He started wringing his hands.
I don't know if I can bear it.
A lot of it is people wishing you well, Angel.
Even that's too much work. So many people to be in debt to. So much effort to talk to them. I don't have the strength to deal with that right now.
He sighed.
It's been so peaceful hiding away.
Can't do it forever,
Tony said, coming to sit next to him and pull him over into a one-armed hug.
I'll help. You know I'll help. You're not alone anymore. What are these?
He picked up the papers.
This looks like Anathema's agency contract. I signed one before I went stateside.
Tony put the contract down, sudden realization making his blood run cold.
Angel, why didn't Sandalphon handle some of the burden for you? That's what you pay him for. Why hasn't he been dealing with your messages? Why didn't he check on you? Angel, how could he have let you get into that condition?
Tony was having nightmares about being too late to rescue Az. The one last night had been particularly realistic. He felt Az's cringe.
Sandy fired me the moment I quit Leo.
Tosser!
Az put his head on Tony's shoulder and sighed.
Yes.
Tony kissed his hair.
Sign Anathema's contract. Newt's right about her. She's uncanny. She sorted my problems out. She can help you.
Az lifted his head.
On one condition.
Name it.
Never leave me again.
I promise.
Later, when Az was really feeling better, Tony made that promise again. He took Az's hand in front of their many friends and swore to stay with him for the rest of his life, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. At first, Anathema tried to get them work they could do together, but Tony flatly refused, paranoid that he'd ruin Az's career again. Az, Newton, and Anathema all pointed out that it was Gabriel and Michael who had tried to ruin both of them, but Tony was adamant. He would not run the risk of jinxing Az. It took her a little extra work, but she found them both plays to appear in. Unfortunately, just as the final details were being worked out, the UK and the world suddenly went into lockdown. To be concluded in Chapter 7. Thank you for reading. Please drop by the archive and let the author know what you thought of their work.